This is the Weigh-In Podcast by Ben Watt Chestnut and normally Sasha Romero, but we will return to our regularly scheduled program soon. So on this week's Weigh-In, we're gonna go over Manny Pacquiao to fight for another world title again. So let's doll that in. Let's doll it in. Really here. So that's gonna be a little bit Manny Pacquiao and the happenings of the boxing world on this epi. So as we get in to get you correct the correct verticized here, uh Pacquiao to fight for the WBC against Barrios. So we're gonna go over that and like I said, the rest of the happenings of the boxing world. So let's get that. As well as we're gonna go over one more to let you know. Usyk versus Daniel Dubois. So let's jump right in. We'll try and go over some of that other stuff, but let's jump right in. So if we really get into this, where we have it, Manny Pacquiao popping out of retirement. Interesting. So Manny Pacquiao to come try to do what most would say is going to be a difficult thing is come out of retirement and try to win the WBC belt. You know, I guess you can't say much more than that because we still have Mayweather who fights as well. So I guess it kind of just all comes down to like, is it still there for them? At what point is it still there for them to see some of these guys going and still getting in the ring? And I think that's a really good thing in terms of like Manny Pacquiao, in terms of Mayweather. Still seeing those guys fight every now and then is really nice to see. It's a really good thing to see is some of those guys still getting out there and really fighting, and that's what's really good. And to see the matchups coming out of boxing is really good because UFC has been stacking up. This past weekend they had a double title fight, so they're stacking up their cards. Boxing is really stacking it up. I think we're looking at the start of a good era for this combat sports, and I think it's at a very good rate to where it needs to be and where it should be. When you talk about combat sports and where it has gone and where it is going, we're talking about big moves. We're talking about big stuff, and I think that's a really good thing for combat sports in general because it's making a healthy move forward in growth. That is just one of the things we like to see here is that healthy growth from combat sports, which is really good. So to have that healthy growth coming out of combat sports, just with boxing, UFC, to have that come out and be really nice and to see things the way they are, to get closer to some of those matchups that we're going to be wanting to get. We got Amanda Serrano we want to see, and Katie Taylor. We want to see that Amanda Katie fight. It's coming. Not here yet, but it's coming. We got Jake Paul on another card. Which is stacking up. I believe MVP signed a couple more boxers again. So it is the growing business. It is the growing business right now. And wait till we get that Dana White Riot seasons up with a couple with their promotion running with some fights going. I think it's gonna bring the heat. I think it is because you know Dana White is good at setting up matchups, but he's not good at paying out those matchups. So I think with Riot Season is going to pay them out, and Dana going to say, I think that's something people want to see. I think it could possibly be something really well. And I like this because it's a format where, we talked about this, why, the UFC hasn't thought about these organizations allowing to snatch other belts. And now you have it where you're going to have that model of Dana White where it's going to be, you're going to set up the guy. The commission's going to still rank them and they'll still figure out what belt's going to be on the line and who gets what. But he doesn't hold the power of, okay, if I like you, you're going to get a UFC title. If I don't feel you're that good, I have you here, you're not going to get a title. Now you're going to set that matchup up almost in a sense to provide, hey, this is deserving of a belt here. Who wants to belt it out? And I think that's going to be a really good thing when it comes in terms of boxing. I think that's going to be a good clash. I know before we talked about if he pays it like he does the UFC, it's not going to be well. But I think you have to be optimistic here. You can't shut something down that hasn't yet gotten up. So you kind of look at it and say, well, we got to see how the first couple fights go for them, and then we can start to make judgment left or right. But I do think that if they do it right, it's going to be great. But nonetheless, to get back to where we were, Manny Pacquiao scheduling another fight. So it kind of looks at like it's possible for Pacquiao to come in and show it's Pacquiao. It's Pacquiao time. And I think that's going to be something very, very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. And I say it's very, very interesting because now you got a guy like Manny Pacquiao. He gets a belt. How long is he going to stick around um, before he says, I'm done here, I'm done there. So it brings us a very interesting partake on where this is going. Where are we going to be moving forward in this boxing sense? And everything is just not quite set when it comes to stuff like that. It's just like, all right, we want these megastar matchups, and we're going to get them. And that's why right now we're looking for the megastar to be shown up. We're looking for the megastar to get done. And to do so, we're looking for a lot of that stuff that we've been looking at to be moved forward. Like Canelo Crawford, if anybody isn't excited to see that come up, very well slated for September, but, has yet to be dousted, that's going to be good. Canelo Crawford is going to be good. Now we're going to get something better than the last fight of Canelo. And the last fight of Canelo was not Canelo's fault. It wasn't Canelo's fault for why that fight wasn't good. Canelo went in there trying to do the job he wanted to do and win his belt back. And the other guy just ran around like a little gazelle. So, you can't really. What can you do there? But I do think that we're going to be bringing something good with this Barrios, Pacquiao fight, because it's interesting to see if Pacquiao can get back in here and, get back to Pacquiao, you know, get back to the things Pacquiao used to do and be Pacquiao. That's going to be very interesting to see him get out there and get something done. It's a lot of good stuff that we're getting ready to see, some stuff really good. And even then, we're seeing a really good scheduling with this Jake Paul fight because Jake Paul has done exactly what we thought he was going to do. And he scheduled something that us fans can be proud of, something us fans can want to sit there and say, we want to see that. And that's the really good things that we're looking for out of Jake. And that's why we're really happy to see some of those matchups out of Jake because of what's happening out of Jake. So we like to see those matchups out of Jake. And now that we're getting that, it's really well. And then you have a Pacquiao scheduling fights, and you got Usyk versus Du Bois coming back. This is just really becoming a boxing world where, it started off, yes, Jake Paul, Canelo, and it failed. But now we're starting to get some other stuff that's looking really good that I think we're going to see. Now, this Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano that we never thought we'd get again. Now we're getting it again. We're getting these, those were some packed house fights that started off, with a lot of stuff. And if many don't know, that MSG card, if we're going around, don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure that was the same MSG card Jake Paul was supposed to be on that card. And Tommy had a whole problem, Tommy Fury, but nonetheless, a lot of good stuff. A lot of good stuff coming out of this boxing world, And it's really good stuff. I think it's stuff that's going to look good. Terrence Crawford's looking to snatch another weight class. He's done two. We've seen three on the women's side. Now we're trying to see it on the men's, and it's a very well thing that we're looking at here that we think it's going to happen. It's going to happen. If you line it up for Terrence Crawford, I think it's going to turn into Crawford's season, and it's going to be a big thing. Now, many of you have wanted to know my thoughts on who wins Canelo versus Crawford. I'm sorry, but if Terrence Crawford comes in that fight the same way he did that Earl Spence fight, he comes in there and he makes a Crawford season, I'm sorry, it's not too many people that are going to be able to last. I think it's possible for that to be a Crawford fight. It's possible. I believe it. I've many times sat there and said, hey, you know, Canelo's got this, Canelo's got this, but this is a true craftsmanship when we talk about Earl Spence. I mean, when we talk about Terrence Crawford, Terrence Buck Crawford, that's a true craftsmanship that is at the top of his game, that isn't really trying to let up. And we talked about the potential boxing clashes that are just like crazy right now. We talk about tanks, but this is like, okay, if Terrence Crawford wins, snatches those belts, becomes undisputed in 3 weight classes. Canelo got his stuff done, you know. Yes, in what most would say a good fashion. You take out Billy Joe Saunders, you take out Caleb Platt, and then you go in there and you got all your belts now. You got all your belts. Then you go ahead, you lose it because you don't want to defend your belt against William. Then you go ahead, now you schedule the fight against William. Don't forget, we had Jaime Munguia in there as well, and some other boxers in between some of that stuff. But Jaime Munguia did a good thing. Jaime Munguia went out there and put up a fight. Jaime Munguia is a well-respected, great boxer. When you look at Jaime Munguia, you look at him, he's really good. He's really good. So I don't doubt anything against Jaime Munguia. But, getting towards this thing, he doesn't lose his belt, doesn't, because he takes the Jaime Munguia fight. Watch, absolutely take the Jaime Munguia fight. Goes off. Now William gets the belt. William is now in a fight against Canelo, then turns around and doesn't even do the things he's supposed to. He doesn't take the fight seriously. He doesn't sit there and say, I have to, this is something I want to win. He might have felt he was going to win, but when you run around the ring, as old McGregor would say, Conor McGregor, when you run around like a gazelle, what do you expect's going to happen? You're going to lose. You can't hop and run around the ring like, hey, this is Saul Canelo. You got the last belt. Go in there and make it a duel. It was more of a duel with Billy Joe Saunders and Caleb Plant. And even then, it wasn't the last belt. They didn't run around trying to say, oh, I'm going to try to win this. No. Running around, they stood up and they fought him. Like Max Holloway says in the UFC, he says, His one fight he had to fight, he said, stand center. And he knocked the guy out. You stand center. You don't run around. You get up there and you box. Problem is, you can't. You can't beat Canelo. You can't outbox him. You can't do certain things that you thought you could do. And that is why you went up there and ran. Now, so I think, in terms of Canelo, I don't ding him as much as I say I do. William went up and did that, and that's why I say, things like when we talk about Manny Pacquiao scheduling a fight, we talk about a really good thing going on here. Manny Pacquiao is scheduling fights for many of reasons, and that's because Manny Pacquiao is very well trying to bring a comeback. Going and saying you're going to fight Barrios for the WBC is amazing, but now you've got to show that you're Manny Pacquiao. You've got to show that you can come back. You can do the same things that Manny Pacquiao has been able to do. And that's not going to be easy, but you want to show that. You want to come back and say, I'm Manny Pacquiao. I can do this. You can do that. When you look at some of that stuff, you want to come back and show why you are Manny Pacquiao. And yes, there was a time and a place for that, but, guys like him and Mayweather have long had their careers here, and I'm not saying you can't do it. I'm saying anything's possible in combat sports. You never know. Like this past weekend, we saw Bo Nickel. Not this past weekend, but we saw Bo Nickel get beat and not get the result he wanted. It just anything's possible. Really out to Bo. Great UFC fighter. Great. Sometimes when you don't get the result you want, it just doesn't happen the way you think. It's always keep your head up and keep growing from that. the one thing is not all fighters were undefeated, but some of your greats have losses, and even then, they are really good, you know, and that's just the truth. Some of your greats have some of the best records possible that are up there that do some of these really good things. And when you talk about that, it's like, hey, not all of them are undefeated. Not all of them are undefeated, So he'll be even in the UFC, a lot of the greats in the UFC are not undefeated. When you talk boxing, a lot of people in boxing want to be undefeated, but some of your greats are not. When we talk about guys, some of the greatest legends of this both sports, not all of them are undefeated. So that's something where you say, hey, you get a notch on that record just because it's not perfect. Let's all remember, even Tank's no longer perfect. He has one draw. So it's kind of one of those things where you say, hey, it's possible, it can happen. When you don't take things at a serious intervaled rate, stuff is more than likely to happen. When you look at that, that is just one thing that can happen. And if you don't take your stuff serious, your fight serious, it will happen. It will happen. And that is why, that's a lot of stuff that just when you talk, it's possible. It's possible because you don't take the things that you're supposed to. So a training camp should always, in any sense, no matter what your fight is, no matter what your match is, no matter what's in front of you, you got to take it serious. Always believe that somebody can beat you. And when you always believe somebody can beat you, then that's the time now you'll be able to believe that you have yet to have won. That when you always believe somebody can beat you, then now you believe. Now you don't get beat because you didn't take it serious. You're saying, I believe you can beat me. Will you do it? Probably not. And that is just one way to take and look at something, is that I believe you can do it, but will you? Probably not. And that's one good way to look at some of the stuff and some of the things that go on is, can it be done? Will it be done? Yes. Yes, it can be done. Will it? Probably not. Depends on two guys that are fighting. But when we talk about that, you say, okay, does that constitute somebody say they should be retired? No. That's why we're saying this Manny Pacquiao coming back. If you think you still got the movement, you still got the power, you still got the expertise, you still got everything rolling very well for you, and you think you can come back and decide to come and take a belt, well, go ahead. Go ahead. Do it. Get in your, as you do it, go ahead and play Party Crasher. Get in your Jake Paul era. Play Party Crasher and take some belts. I know many will say, well, no, Jake hasn't taken any belts. Not yet. Not yet. Yeah, not yet. You play Party Crasher long enough, you can take some belts. You can take it. And when you're there long enough, it will happen. So, that's why I'm saying here, for for Manny, great scheduling of a fight. Great scheduling here against his Barrios. This is great. We'd love to see Manny Pacquiao get back in action and show us Manny Pacquiao, you know. And this is just being able to, and this is stuff that's going to grow this sport. You see, like a Mayweather fight, these kids are going to be able to say, hey, we saw Mayweather fight, wow, that's an all-time great. That's a legend, an icon of the sport. You know, I saw Manny Pacquiao. That's another legend, an icon of the sport. You know, you talk about the things that go on between that, and you say those are icons and legends of the sport doing all great things. And that is a really good thing to say, doing all great things and things like that is really good for Manny Pacquiao and for stuff like that. And that's why we say you're legends, you're icons of the sport. You're doing very well. When you look at a guy like Canelo, despite how he might have got to being undisputed, despite the matchups he may be running from, he scheduled Terrence Crawford. He's putting himself on the line. You're going to get some points there. But now, when you talk about stuff like, should Jake Paul have been scheduled? Yes. Yes, we should have had Jake Paul. Does that mean we shouldn't have got Terrence Crawford? No. It means we should have still had both, and we still may. When Crawford's done, like we always say, we want to see Jake Paul. When we talk about Manny Pacquiao, we want to see you bring them matchups. When you take Barrios' belt, if and when, more likely when, you're Manny Pacquiao, show him how it's done, and you take Barrios' belt, Go ahead, great. Get the next one. Let's see you snatch somebody else's. Go ahead and play Party Crasher and take some more belts. Go ahead, do it. Now that's the stuff we talk about when boxing is getting stuff scheduled. We talk about boxing getting back to boxing, and that is about those party crashing weight classes. Guys coming in saying, "I can beat you, and I'm gonna show you how I'm gonna do it." The Lamont Roach style. I'm gonna come in and show you, and when you don't take me serious, you're gonna end up with that draw, that notch on your record. And that's what happens when you don't take fights serious. When you put yourself in a situation when you know you have your most skilled opponent, when you have stuff like that, you have to say, "Hey, I believe this guy can beat me. I believe this guy can stop me." You get in there, the power's too much, change the game plan. Put yourself in the right game plan so you can make the right movement that you need to make to be better for you, to be better for what you're going to do. That's the stuff you talk about when it comes in terms of doing that good boxing, that good. You talk about the amount of movement that happens. You want to do the best stuff you can do. That's the things you want to do. You don't want to do stuff and say, "Hey, you know, I didn't get the way I wanted. I didn't do what I wanted to do." You want to get your best stuff done. Your best stuff you want to get done. And you want to get that done for many reasons because what's going to happen is going to be monumental. And that talks about the monumentalness of being boxing and scheduling matchups and getting to that point where you've built yourself better than the times before. You've given everybody the matchups they want to see. You've tested and challenged yourself in ways that you never had before. And that's one typical way to take a hard look at it. Not everybody's going to do stuff like that. Not everybody's going to challenge themselves. Not everybody is going to sit there and say, "I deserve to be this. I deserve to do that." They don't all do it. And that's something that is very typical of most opponents. They're not going to all do it. And that's because they're not all going to take the same lengths as they should. When you look at a matchup, you expect it to be megastar. You expect it to be monumental. You expect it to be something that lines up the fans. You expect it to be something where the fans look and they say, "Wow, we're getting exactly what we thought we would get. We're getting exactly what we want to get." And now you turn around and you don't get that. And now you're like, "Well, wait a minute. What happened here? What happened here? And why are we not getting what we were supposed to get? Why are we not getting some of the things we thought were coming to us?" And that's because when you talk about a megastar matchup, you talk about stuff that where you have to be very uniformed to the way this goes about it. If you think that you can beat your opponent and you believe he can't beat you and you're not taking it serious, it's very likely for you to get beat. That's the seriousness of taking your events. That's the seriousness of taking a fight that stands before you, that stands in front of you. And that just happens because when you don't take stuff serious, you get beat. You get stopped. Things happen where you say, "Hey, how did this happen?" Well, because if you're not going to take it serious, you're going to get beat. I think in terms of scheduling fights and getting after it, you're going to get beat if you sit there and you just don't think that somebody can stop you in the way you think you can be stopped. You're like, "Hey, I can't be stopped. This isn't something that's going to happen." Well, then you put yourself in that a lucrative situation where somebody will stop you, and they will stop you, and they're going to stop you because you've now lined yourself up in a way that you're not taking something as serious as you expected to be taking it. You're taking it almost like you can't be beat. And when you take something like that, you got to show it. You got to show it. And you have to show it in a way where somebody doesn't look at that and say, "Wait a minute. He wasn't unstoppable. He just got himself tore up. He just got himself beat. He just got himself absolutely corralled in that fight." And now you say, "Hey, you know, what at what point do you say, were they taking that serious?" That was the conversations we had about Lamont Roach and Tank. We said, "Hey, was Tank taking that fight serious?" That was one thing, I was saying to myself, did it look like Tank took this fight serious? And a lot of times people say, "Yeah, he did." People say, "No, he didn't." But me, he didn't. It didn't look like it to me. I used the way he walked into the weigh-in. I say the way he walked into I mean, not the weigh-in, the way he walked into that press media workout. You got to get them to show up. It takes some time to come in. You're not really ready to put on the show. That just, it's possible. It happens. And that's just one thing that I say, you don't want to put yourself in situations of that nature when you think you're unstoppable, when you think you're non-beatable, when you think, hey, I'm at the top of the totem, there's no stopping me. Well, that's not true. It's not true. I believe anybody and anybody and anyone can be stopped at any moment in time. I kind of feel like any boxer, any UFC guy, any moment in time you can be stopped. I think that just goes without saying. You can't just expect that because I'm this and I'm that, because I'm this big and no, and Ryan Garcia didn't stop me and Past before didn't stop me, that Roach can't do it and that Frank Martin didn't do it. Roach came in differently. He had a different game plan, and he showed his game plan was different. And that's what I'm saying. As for Manny Pacquiao, he's got to think about this different, and like some of the other stuff that has been scheduled. When you talk about, Du Bois versus Usyk, I definitely think that's very well an Usyk fight. Usyk has boxed very well. It's stuff like that where you say, okay, we're looking at the differences here and where it may go. What is going to line itself up in front of us? What is going to be tight? What is going to be different? What is going to change the world in terms of boxing? And I think there's a lot of things that are making good changes, but you have to continue to schedule some of that stuff you want to see. You can't not schedule the stuff that we want to see. You can't not do the things we want to see. There, we are very clear on the fights we want to see and the stuff we want to get, and you can't not do it. I think in terms of boxing, you just can't not. It's just not something that we're willing to not see or anything like that. It's stuff that we want to see, stuff that we want to have seen. And I think that's something where when you talk about what you have and want to see, it a lot of times it doesn't always align. You want to see Canelo Jake Paul, but have you seen it? No, because it hasn't happened yet. Will it? Who knows? There's stuff like that where we say we don't know what may or may not see certain things and what matchup may not come, because that is in terms of what we as a fan want to see. And that's just something that you come across, and when you see Manny Pacquiao and Mayweather getting back in the ring, you're like, you want to see these guys perform their best. You want to see these guys do what they've continued to do and what they did, built their careers to that height that it got to. You talk about, hey, we want to build that career the way it is. We want to build the manifesto the way it manifested when they were boxers that were professional. I mean, when they were, at their primes of their career. And when you talk about certain stuff like that, you talk about pinnacles and you talk about ways that you want to see certain things that many thought, is it even possible? Well, we figured it is possible. It is very well possible. And now we get to embark on whether we will see it. How far will it go? Where will it get us? And that's the great parts of everything. How far will it go? Where will it go? And I say that because, it's how far will Maddie want to go with this? But, honestly, it is what it is. So at this point, as we draw closer into our end, talking about how, what we want to see out of Manny Pacquiao, what we want to see out of most. I think it's a good boxing world. It's really good right now in terms of combat sports. I think it's very well because we're seeing a lot of good matchup. I don't think there's too many UFC fights where you're not seeing these guys really, really get in here. We're not seeing bloodbath fights, but we're seeing really good stuff. And I think that it's a time where that's really good. In terms of UFC, it's really good that, we're starting to see some really good stuff. We're starting to see, it get back to where it should be, and that's really good. In terms of like UFC, in terms of a lot of things. that's just really good. And that's why I say it's really good stuff happening. So, with that being said, with that being said, like, comment, subscribe, share, yet again, continuing the streak. So, with that being said, this is The Weigh In by Benoit Chestnut and normally Sebastian Romero, but we will return to our regularly scheduled program at some point. Normally I say soon, but at some point. At this point, it's at some point. You have gotten the point that at some point there will be a return. Um, you know, I say the best thing that brings that I will say this in the end that brings the best friendships when you have twos that can come together and run a pod when one falls into not having being able to have time. You still have that other person that's going to keep it up, and that's just kind of how it is for us right now. You know, as things go on, everybody's a working individual. Schedules will come out and things will happen in ways where you can't line yourself up to be able to do certain things, and that's fine. That's fine because for the fans of the weigh-in, we will always figure out who's gonna get an episode up, and just right now it has tentatively turned to me getting the episodes up, and I started the streak and I kind of said I'm going to get this here, and that's kind of what I've done for you guys, because at the end of the day you're fans of the weigh-in and that's what we want to bring you. So that's just a little update non-update kind of thing, but this is The Weigh-In by Benoit Chestnut and Sebastian Romero, and like, comment, subscribe, share. Weigh-In out.